We want to start off with a reminder that we are not doctors. Before you make any changes or try something new, always consult with your doctor and medical team first. Chronic illness can vary from patient to patient, so it's always best to consult with your own doctor for what is best for you.
Hello, welcome to I Be Determined. I'm your host, Mason Harvey, and I have Crohn's disease.
And I'm your host, Michelle Harvey. I'm Mason's mom, and I speak from the role of a caregiver. And today's topic, we mentioned last week what we would be discussing, and we just had to make sure Mason was okay talking about this. It's an important topic
to touch up about.
It is. So the topic today is going to be grief, and it's going to be mostly as it pertains to chronic illness. But I think it's something that's important to be discussed because I think a lot of caregivers and a lot of care recipients like Mason, you go through these feelings and may not recognize what you're going through. And there's also maybe some guilt associated with feeling that way. And so I think it's important to discuss, and just like we always do, you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's why we do this, so we can be honest and open and maybe talk about something that you've been thinking about and hopefully help you guys out. The things that kind of prompted this topic too at this time of the year is
the holidays.
Yeah. And we're coming up on Christmas right now, and for a lot of people, the holidays bring up a lot of emotions. And for us, there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of happiness,
excitement.
Yeah. And then there's also sadness too, which is very real, I think, for everybody. So for some of you, some of the feelings that can be associated with the holidays is missing family or friends. And
friends or family.
That could be because of the loss of somebody. Someone may have passed away. And it could be recent. It could be a long time ago. It really doesn't matter. It's all how you feel it and the emotions you go through with it.
Maybe they always came to the holiday events, so you have good memories of them coming to the events. So you really miss them around those times.
And so those feelings might not be because of something that hurt you. It could be something you miss because you love them and you really enjoyed those times. So that can be difficult. And it can also be difficult when there are family members that are still alive and for whatever reasons aren't acknowledging you and aren't being part of your family any longer. And sometimes when a family member does this, it can be especially tough if you're going through health challenges. And especially if you have lost somebody and you are going through a health challenge, this time can be especially difficult. So it can be difficult for many reasons. We felt this topic would fit in well because some of you out there, you may not have a chronic illness, you may not have IBD, but you might still be experiencing some sort of feelings of sadness or
missing people.
Yeah. I think this is something to remember every day, but the holidays are good to remind us is to be kind because you don't know what someone else is going through. I mean, I think it's fair to say everybody has something, right?
No one knows what another person is going through. So it's always good to be kind to someone.
Yeah, because a lot of times we get swept up in our own issues and forget
to acknowledge the other person.
Right. To acknowledge somebody else and say, wow, they're having a problem too. And my problem isn't bigger than their problem, but it's just good to acknowledge each other and have that mutual kindness. So I think the holidays are a good reminder to do this year round, not just at the holidays.
No, not just the holidays.
I know a lot of people tend to do this more at the holidays because it's just kind of the spirit of the holidays, but it should be every day. This should be something that
the holiday can remind you for the rest of the year.
Yep. That's
and the next
really
year.
Good. Yeah. So with that said, let's focus on today's topic, which is grief. And this is in particular, this type of grief is related to chronic illness like Crohn's disease and kind of like mourning somebody when they are still alive. Which a lot of times grief is associated with losing somebody or losing something. So for me, I know when Mason got sick, I went through so many emotions. I remember sitting out front of the hospital and just feeling like this loss, like there was just so much loss.
I wasn't gone, I was still alive.
And I felt guilty because I knew that I was having all these emotions, but there was other families that had lost a child or had lost somebody. And so I kind of felt like I didn't deserve to have the pain I had because I hadn't suffered a loss like that. And so there's these feelings that were kind of guilt out of that. And I just felt like I should just be grateful that my son was still here. But that pain just kind of persisted. And I don't know for you, Mason, did you feel any feelings of loss or did when you were diagnosed, or did it take a little bit of time for things to kind of
I
settle
feel
in?
like maybe a little bit of time, but I think one of the first things I thought when I was diagnosed with Crohn's I thought I never thought I'd have a disease. And when I got this
Wow.
disease, I was like, my entire life just changed,
Yeah,
I wasn't
instantly.
yeah, I wasn't the kid before who didn't have a disease and didn't have to worry about like going to the hospital. I realized I had a disease and that would change my entire life, and it would just almost like reform my life into something way different from what it was before.
Right. And I
Kind of
think,
like a loss of life, I guess.
right, which is kind of why we're talking about this, where you suddenly start to realize that everything is different and you're homesick. Like you want your old life
Your life
back.
sick.
Yeah.
You want your old life back.
Yeah. And you just want to go back to that security, that comfort, those happy days, those carefree days
Yeah.
where
And you didn't have to worry
you
about your
didn't have to worry
disease.
about it. That was something that you miss. And it's all of a sudden things are just so different.
You have to watch your diet, maybe. You have to you can't really go places because you're immune compromised. You have to worry about all these different things you didn't have to worry about before.
And thinking about like anxiety or pain, worrying that you're going to go into a flare, worrying about the different treatments, are they going to work? It was a lot. And even looking, like I remember looking on my phone at pictures and seeing pictures from before the diagnosis and just kind of feeling sad because I felt like I had no idea that our lives were going to change
So instantly.
yeah. And I missed it. I just wanted to go back. And it's kind of interesting too, because I think a lot of you can relate to this. We kind of refer to everything. I don't know if you noticed, but it's like before Crohn's and after Crohn's. When we talk about our
It's a big
lives,
separation.
it is like when we talk about things like,
The great
oh,
divide.
we went on this vacation before Mason was sick, or
He started being a speaker after he got diagnosed.
it's either before or after. And it's like there's this separate life you lived. Like you have like almost like a looking back at somebody else's life, like a different family, because your family is now so different than what you thought it was going to be or what it was. That's kind of interesting, huh? Like to miss, I mean, you're still alive and you still
Yeah,
have
you're
things
still alive,
but
your life
it's
just
different.
changed so much.
And I think a lot of people, there's many reasons why life could change for a lot of you listening beyond IBD. And I think you can completely understand what we're talking about. It is like you have this before and after, and it's forever there. That line is forever there because that is where your old life stopped.
It can't be erased.
And your new life started. Yeah. And so it's just kind of, that's the only way I can describe it. I'm sure there's better ways, but that's how it is in my mind.
You're just trying.
So, I went through all these emotions. Mason went through a lot of emotions, and thankfully he had a therapist, and I even had a therapist at one point as well. And we finally got to a place where we can make a decision, and that's kind of like to accept the diagnosis and to start to empower yourself. And that's what we did for Mason, to give him some control over something so out of control. And in doing that, all of our goals shifted. And so that's kind of where your life changes too, because it's like maybe what my goals were prior to him being diagnosed might be very different
to the goals
after
being diagnosed.
Yeah. So one of the things that was interesting is, like we were just saying, that your life isn't what you pictured it was going to be. And that's also because, like, for Mason, the disease is incurable.
Yeah,
right?
If that's the case, I could look at it different. Like this is only a certain amount of time, but when it's not curable, I'm just thinking about how my entire life, not just a few years, my entire life is going to change.
Right. It's very ominous. It's a very big decision for you to kind of look at all that and say, okay, how do I accept this and how do I handle this?
How do I understand this?
Right.
More?
And so what I figured out is that we were going through grief. We were grieving the life we had, or the life we thought we
We
were
have.
going to
Yeah,
have.
that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, because it's like we thought nobody knows what life is going to deal you with. That's one of the
Yeah.
biggest
We
lessons
didn't think
we
we were gonna
learned.
have a perfect life,
No.
but we thought we are gonna have a disease-free life, I guess
Right.
you
I
could
mean, you're
say,
gonna
you
have
know? Yeah, there's
challenges,
gonna be
but you
challenges,
don't picture with a child starting life and having these large health
issues, yeah,
challenges.
that can devastate their entire life, you know?
Right. And so you also kind of feel like you're missing out too
Mhm.
because you're stuck in this diagnosis. So you watch everyone else move on. In the beginning, for a lot of people, there's a lot of support. There's a lot of people that are there for you and trying to help bring meals or just offer to do things. And slowly, as time goes on, life gets back to normal, which is completely fair.
Yeah.
And they move on, but
You
you
don't. Yeah, you're
don't.
stuck with
You're
health.
still there with that same diagnosis, with those same appointments, with the same procedures. And so you kind of see people moving on in their
Nothing wrong with the
lives.
people moving on, that's just what
Not
they
at
do, you
all.
know?
Not at
It's
all.
normal for them.
Right. This is just to say that there's nothing wrong with either things, just to say where these feelings
Yeah.
come from, that you feel like, "Ugh, I'm stuck. I'm
Yeah.
here and they're there. And that's where I was supposed to be.
I
I want to
can't
be on
move.
vacation. I want my son to be able to run out and kick a soccer ball and be able just to run around in the yard
You're
and
stuck with this disease.
yeah, or to get in a car and not have
Yeah.
pain when we go over a speed bump.
But thankfully that's better,
Yeah,
but
just little
yeah.
things. And so everything that is small becomes big and it's just kind of magnified and you see life differently. And so
Like life
that's
kind of like, I guess a good way of saying it was like kind of like after I was diagnosed, I kind of felt like life was kind of like in slow-mo, I guess, you know?
yeah, I can see that.
Because you
I
pay
can see
attention
that.
to things more and more and more.
Right.
And almost like time goes by faster somehow, but it also goes by slower because you're counting down the days till the appointments. But
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
good point.
but
That's a
then
good
for some
point.
reason it still feels slow. It's like hard to say because it's like going fast, but at the same time it feels slower.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can see why you would say
It's a
that.
weird paradox.
Yeah. Besides like Mason as the care receiver, there's the caregiver
Mhm.
who you also go through an adjustment in your life. And now this can depend. Maybe you're an adult who's diagnosed and you don't have a caregiver, you don't have somebody taking care of you, you're not a child. So you are responsible for your own life. So you will go through grief as well a little differently. And a caregiver and the child, they're going to go through it also differently.
And the caregiver has to worry about keeping them healthy and making sure they feel good, you know, make sure they feel fine.
Yeah, because you want to make sure your child is okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's also fair to say that even though you're an adult and you may not have a caregiver, you may be an adult with a family. So where we were it's kind of reversed with us, where I'm the caregiver and he's the child with the disease. In some families, you'll be the adult with the disease and have kids that you caregive for. And so it gets complicated. It's not just
it gets confusing.
Yeah, it does. And so that's why you're going to experience things differently. And so for this, when we were planning this episode, we looked up the National Institute of Health because I wanted to see what it said about caregivers and care recipients like Mason. One of the things they describe for part of why it is so difficult is for caregivers, you have a loss of independence, a loss of flexibility, loss of work,
Loss of control,
loss of financial stability,
loss of freedom,
and the loss of what you used to enjoy as a family.
which you could just do easily.
Yeah, things that were just so easy and such easy decisions are no longer easy
or like available maybe.
And there's many other things, but these are just a few. And I included these because I think I can relate to these, and I think a lot of you can relate to it too, because we're not going through the disease, but we are taking care of a child who is, or a teen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it affects my life. And so not only is his life changing, my life is changing. And so the family dynamic changes as well. And then for like a care receiver, some of the things so the care receiver, to be fair, is going to experience everything that I just described for the caregiver. They're also experiencing that, but they're also going to experience like a loss of dignity. Sometimes, like in Mason's case, a loss of mobility.
Sometimes my back would go out, or I didn't want to move, you know, maybe.
Right.
I'm urging, I guess you could say, or I'm in a flare and you don't really want to go places.
It's a loss of the same quality of life. You don't have that same quality of life. And you also may have a loss of friends because it's not as easy to hang out with friends when you're in a flare or if you're immunosuppressed. A loss of school is also difficult for kids because you do miss a lot of school with this.
Which could end up as a lot of work you have to do later.
Yeah.
Which can all pile up and gets very annoying.
Yeah. So you have to stay on top of it and work on weekends a lot of time for that. And it's everything that I mentioned for a caregiver, but also the pain. You're experiencing the actual physical side of it. Yeah. So in addition to that, so it's a lot. And you go from having this, normal life
yeah, not
to
perfect,
this,
but normal.
And so regular life just keeps going, it just keeps going forward. Time keeps moving.
You're here. This is you moving, and this is time.
Yeah,
time keeps moving. You're not going to be able to stop time. Time just goes on.
And so you kind of sometimes for some people out there, it's easier to ignore these feelings of loss or ignore these feelings just so you can function because you have to continue moving. You can't just stop and say, well, today I'm sad. I'm just going to be sad today.
It's going to stop.
Right. It's like, I have responsibilities. Yeah. I have things to do. Mason has his own responsibilities, his own things to do. Life keeps going and you have to continue to go with it while you're having all these feelings. And so some people, it's easier for them to bury the feelings. It's important to handle these issues before it leads to bigger mental health issues. And it gets to be such a problem that you are really depressed and really down. And so
it can lead to other bad things.
It can. And especially with IBD, stress, anxiety can lead to flaring. It can make things worse. So it's important to say it's okay that you're feeling this. Don't feel guilty for feeling this loss. It's real emotions and it's what you're going through. So don't be afraid to process those feelings that are so tough and to reach out and have someone help you along the way.
Have someone to talk to.
When I realized was grieving, I was like, oh my gosh, this all makes sense. All of these feelings make sense. And you can experience grief in your own way too. So I want to be clear, there's the 5 stages, but this is what they talk about. But everyone. There is a different way.
It's different for everyone. Grief is different for everyone. They'll have
different ways. It is. And I mean, this is going to be the most general, and you may have all of these. You may have had a few of these. You may be going through the process right now and haven't encountered all of them. But it's just like with the diseases, nothing is linear. It doesn't go in a straight line. You're going to be up and down.
Up, down. A coaster, which is a good way of explaining it.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It is just not as fun.
No.
Not like a super fun one you look forward to.
Aren't that fun for me either, depending on the one. So,
Yeah, you're not always a fan.
But if you like them, it's not fun.
You don't like the drops.
No, I don't like drops.
Yeah, but the 5 stages that are traditionally what we talk about are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And these are also this is what I read on Healthline. I could relate to all of those, and I could see exactly where I fit in. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. There's a newer model though that suggests there are 7 stages to describe more complicated grief. And I think that's important to mention. Yeah. So one of them is shock and denial. I think when you were diagnosed, I
definitely had shock and
right,
denial. I wanted to deny that I had a disease that I was diagnosed with.
You're kind of disbelief.
Yeah. No, that can't be happening.
No. And I experienced that in a way of this can't be happening to him. And sometimes you go through numbed feelings when you go through that denial, or you just, and I remember feeling very numb as sometimes, and it was very difficult to wrap your head around this diagnosis, and asking questions helped. I did ask a lot of questions during this time that really did help me to understand it, because you don't want to just stay in denial. You can't, because you can't deny it. Right. So you want to get past that, but it's normal for everybody to feel no, this can't be happening. It was wrong, right? The test was wrong. Can you redo those biopsies and
there's no way I was just diagnosed with a disease that is on the scale.
Because he'd always been so healthy, and this was how
from being so healthy to being so
not healthy. Yeah, with the disease, it's it's difficult.
Yeah.
And the other one they describe is pain and guilt. The diagnosis is unbearable, and then you feel bad because you feel like you're making other people's lives harder because of your feelings or needs. And I think that can pertain to the care recipient, like Mason, the patient, that it's difficult with anyone with this diagnosis, and you might feel bad because you don't want to be like considered a burden, which is not the case. It's not at all. Like, it's, for me, I wanted to help him in whatever way I could, and I was willing to do anything, and I still am. And I think any
The
caregiver
best
out
caregiver
there,
in the world.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
But it's important to just understand, if you're listening, you have this disease, don't feel bad, and express yourself, talk about your emotions. It's okay. It's, so you shouldn't go through this feeling any guilt that you're making somebody else their lives difficult or harder because of your feelings or needs. That's not the
No,
case
it's not.
at all. It makes it easier for me to know where Mason's feeling so I can help him. But this is just part of that grieving process, though, because sometimes that diagnosis is so difficult to accept. And then there's anger and bargaining. So this is where you lash out and you'll like do anything if they'll just change the diagnosis. Like,
change the disease, cure the disease, get rid of it.
yeah. So you're kind of like trying to bargain with like, okay, I'll do anything. And that's not going to be realistic. You need to get through those feelings though, because that's normal. And the anger along with it, that's also normal. So that was something I experienced too, was that anger and feeling very upset that this was happening to my child. I wouldn't want this to happen to anyone's child. And it was just very upsetting that this was happening. And so you do have this anger, and you don't really, I don't know if you felt angry.
I don't know if I felt angry. I was
no.
just like maybe disbelief.
You were angry you weren't going to get food.
Yeah, I was just mad that I was on
angry. You're angry at the treatments.
I was specifically mad at Crohn's. I was mad that what was causing.
Yeah, so you had different anger, so it was in a different direction.
Food.
Yeah. And the other one mentioned is depression and isolation and loneliness, where you process the diagnosis and loss, because it is still a loss. Nobody's passed away. You're not dying,
You
but
just like lost your past self.
Right.
You lost your future that you could have had,
Yeah. So that's where sometimes people isolate themselves, and there's that loneliness as you begin to process those feelings. And one of the other ones they mentioned is the upward turn. And that's where feelings like anger and pain have like died down. It's a little quieter now. You're feeling maybe a little more relaxed and calm about things. And then there's the reconstruction and working through phase, where you put the pieces of your life back together and you start to move forward. And as we talked about, you really don't have a choice.
No.
Life is going to move forward with or without you. So you kind of have to just make that decision to work on bettering your life so you can move forward in the way you want to move forward, to take control of your own power in it.
It's okay to feel like sad, but you just have to keep moving.
Yeah. And actually, that's important to mention too, is that with these feelings, they can come back. So it's like Mason just said, it's okay to feel sad. You may have gone through it, and then all of a sudden something remind you or take you back, and you have to go through those feelings again. And I know with a disease like Mason's, and like any of you out there with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, is sometimes just when things get going good, they go bad.
Yeah.
And you kind of go back into those scary feelings again and get dragged back down into those same like anger, those same feelings all come flooding back. Because it's not a linear process. Things will get better, and sometimes it's going to be difficult. But so this is kind of always might be an ongoing situation for some of you. It doesn't mean you get through your grief, you're done, you've moved on. It's okay if it happens again, but it's really good to have therapy in place, have help.
So there's a chance it will still come back, but there's less of a chance maybe it'll come back,
Yeah, keep your stress levels down.
Yeah, keep your stress levels down.
Yeah, keep
the flare down.
Right.
Helps everything.
And one of the last stages that they talk about is acceptance and hope. And that is kind of like you've slowly started to accept the diagnosis and life changes, and you're thinking about the possibilities of the future. And like I think with Mason and I, where we got when we started figuring out, okay, he liked public speaking. He liked doing different things where he got to meet scientists, and he liked getting to be a part of activities with the San Diego
Raising
Blood Bank
awareness.
and raising awareness. Yeah. And so those things we found out helped him to accept the diagnosis, but to take control of it. And that really did help. Yeah. Just important to know that this grief is, because it's like you're on an ongoing roller coaster with an incurable disease. Sometimes you'll circle back and go through it again, but you'll probably recognize it. That's what I've done. I know that's one of the things I've done, and you can recognize it much faster. And there's some of you listening that aren't going through this grief or aren't going through this, but you're probably thinking, well, how do I help? How can I help my friend or my family member who's going through this? So we also looked online at healthline.com, and some of the suggestions I'm going to go through with Mason. I want to see what he thinks about these. So I'll kind of read them to you and you can see what you think. The first one is to be available, to offer support, but not in an obtrusive manner. So what do you think of that?
Maybe like asking questions about them because you care and you want to understand what they're going through.
Right. So listen and ask questions. Yeah. That's fair. I think that's good. So listen without giving advice is another recommendation. Mm-hmm. Listen to what the person is saying, and maybe they just want you to listen. Maybe they just want you to ask some questions. And if you have solid advice, like if you're a medical professional and someone is asking a question, that's where you will want to give your advice. But if you don't have like a solid solution or answer, sometimes people know that and they know you don't have the answer, but they just want you to listen. Yeah. And so that's important, is to make sure you're listening and understand what they're saying. The other one is try not to offer your own stories with grief. Mm-hmm. This can make someone feel their grieving or pain is being dismissed. Mm-hmm. So
you're just like, maybe they feel like they're trying to be outdone. Maybe, I don't know, maybe something like that.
I think this is kind of a gray area. And I feel like I've been guilty of this, and I have not meant it in a way to hurt somebody. But like if somebody came to us and was telling us their story with going through grief and it was because of chronic illness, I'd feel like I'd want to jump in and be like, oh, I understand. I can relate. But I think it's important to not turn it into something about you. Yeah. And I think unintentionally you think you're helping, but to that person, they feel like you've stopped listening and now you're talking about your story. Yeah. So I think there's this gray area where telling your story can help somebody, but know your place, like know where to discuss that. If someone is discussing their own story with grief, allow them to talk about it, give them whatever help you can based on your situation, I guess. But if they are talking about their own story with grief, just don't turn it into your story with grief.
Listen to their story and give them a chance.
Right. And like I said, it is difficult because you might think, oh, I can help them because I've been through this. And that's potentially different too. So it's just basically not making it about you, though. That's the important thing, is not to make it your time to shine and tell it your story. And it has to be in a way that helps. Right. And the other thing is to allow the person to express anger or bitterness. Don't tell them they shouldn't be feeling that way, and don't tell them they're wrong for that. Allow them to feel that.
It's important to let people express their feelings, as long as it's not destructive or
right
things that could hurt others, themselves. But it's important to let them express their feelings.
Right. If you feel that anger is going to hurt somebody or something, then you should say something or talk to somebody. And so the other thing that might be a little difficult is to allow someone to feel the pain. We can't take that away. Like nobody could have changed how you were feeling, right? Yeah. I mean, we tried. We did everything we could to make it better, but at the heart of it all, we couldn't take away the disease.
Crohn's,
No, you have to allow someone to experience that, and just know that you can't change that. You can't take away the diagnosis. So just understand that pain that they're feeling and why they're feeling it. Also be patient, kind, and understanding. Don't claim to know what the person is going through. I think this is something I see a lot.
Or it's like talking at people. Don't talk at people. Mm-hmm. Maybe like talk to them, ask questions. Comes back to the same thing we talked about, comment kind of almost, where you ask questions and don't tell them what's going to happen.
Right. Because if you try to act like, especially if you haven't been through it, and you've had a similar situation, just be careful saying, oh, I know exactly what you're going through, because everybody's situation is different.
Especially with
And
Crohn's, it's different for everyone.
it is. And some people don't realize that. Actually, I feel like that's what I try not to do on this show. It's like we try to help you guys and say that there's other possibilities, because we don't want to act like know-it-alls, because we recognize that there are different solutions for everybody. And human beings are so different in their own right. And then you bring in chronic illness or Crohn's disease, and it's like that's different too. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that you need to just be patient and just be an understanding person and be kind. And you don't have to know what they're going through or convince them you know it to be that kind of person. Also, don't force someone to share their feelings if they don't want to. And I think, like, for you, therapy was kind of a challenge at the beginning, because I don't think you didn't feel ready.
No.
Like, you were like, I don't
want to tell someone about my disease,
Yeah.
And it's also so new to me. I don't know what to talk about it, kind of,
Right. But I think we got through that. We ended up just saying, well, we need to do this for you. I think this is important. The doctor thought it was important. The therapist will know how to handle it. His therapist has never pushed Mason to say anything. And it's more of letting Mason say what he wants to say and when he wants to say it. And then the therapist will kind of go with
my
that.
therapist is watching. You're the greatest therapist I ever lived.
We really like Jeannie. She is great.
She is a genie.
she's been like magic.
Yeah.
So but it's important to understand there's therapy for that. But as a friend, if someone doesn't want to talk about it, don't force them to. Just like let them decide. But it is different. It's different when you have a child, because it's like adults have different boundaries, and sometimes I think kids do. And I think sometimes people feel like it's okay to force kids, like to talk to them, tell how you're feeling. And I don't know if you always know how you're feeling. I think that's part of the reason it's hard to share, is because you don't even really know how to process it. But as a parent, I do think you need to listen to your kids and just encourage them that you are there when they do want to talk. You are there
for them.
So for some people, physical or emotional touch can bring comfort. So you don't hesitate to hug or hold a hand unless you're unsure of the person's boundaries. Yeah. So there's different things with that. How I feel like
if they are immunocompromised,
Right. So
and
it's
you were
like
just recently at a really big party, or you're out of the state or country or whatever. Yeah.
Right. You don't want to run up and just be like, I'm going to hug you. So it's important to understand and know the person and say, hey, I know that they wouldn't mind a hug right now, but don't be afraid to make that connection with somebody. And I know that it was kind of weird. Like when Mason was diagnosed, people would come visit us at the hospital. This was during that 2-month stay. And it was during COVID, like the early days of COVID. And we still didn't know a whole lot about it. I had to be very careful because I was going back in the hospital with Mason, so nobody could hug me. And that was a really difficult time, because you would be crying or be emotional and someone comes up to you and you just kind of stare at each other. You're like,
oh, this is awkward.
Yeah. It's like, can I hug you? And it's like, no, you can't hug me. I wish you could.
Air hugs.
Yeah. So it was a really weird time where you couldn't have that comfort. And so not a single hug. I didn't get any hugs. And that wasn't because people didn't want to comfort or do that. It was just we couldn't do that. Yeah. So it's also something we talked about earlier, that as time passes, a lot of friends and family disappear. They disappear in the sense that, like we said, it's natural. Time goes on, their lives move on. They have their own issues, their own stuff
to what they have to do.
Yeah, they have. And then as time goes on, other people, things happen to other people. And then suddenly they're going through something. And so it's just a normal thing that people move forward. But for those of you that are hearing this, it's a good reminder to kind of check back on people that maybe you haven't checked on in a while, just to say, hey, how are you doing? I know it's been 3 years since this diagnosis.
How are you doing? It's been so long. What has changed about your diagnosis? What's going on? How are you feeling?
And we're fortunate enough. We have a lot of supportive friends and family that check in on Mason, and Mason gets so much love and support. So we're very lucky in that way. But I know there's some people out there who might not be. So if you're listening and you haven't checked in on somebody who did go through something, whether it was a month ago, a year ago, several years ago, check in on them. And I think they would really appreciate that. it makes a difference. It's also important to remember, this was on Healthline as well, to remember holidays, anniversaries, and birthdays are going to have important meaning.
So important things that signify a person's life.
Right. You might be going through grief and like, because these days are difficult.
I miss the Christmases when I didn't have a disease,
Yeah. It's and then on a birthday,
Halloweens when I could go trick-or-treating because I wasn't immunocompromised.
Even your birthdays. Like
you can have big parties.
Well, and thinking back to how it was.
Yeah, how it was without having Crohn's.
Right. And then thinking, that on your next birthday you'll be this old but it's different now. And so it's a difficult time and just so be courteous and understanding that someone may not be as happy as you'd expect them to always be because they might be going through something. Don't be afraid to share stories or memories is another way you can help. And like I mentioned earlier, it was difficult for me at first to talk about old stories or talk about things because I felt like just kind of frustrated. But now I can look back at it differently. And so I am thankful when people bring up stories about Mason or things that happened. And we just had a friend and she was reminding me when her daughters went to one of Mason's birthdays and she was saying they drove by the place because it was a reptile.
Yeah, it was a
place.
It was a really fun birthday.
They got to hold snakes. They got to hold all kinds of turtles, all of it. It was really cool.
Hold a boa constrictor.
Yeah, you held a really big snake.
He was a cute one. He was a cute
one. Yeah. But it was this really cool place. And they were just saying, they're like, oh my gosh, do you remember that? And it was cool because we were able to talk about it and laugh and like have a good time. And it didn't hurt. It wasn't like this is painful. I love when people do bring up memories or share stories.
Memories of the past.
Yeah. And another thing you can do is to send cards, flowers, if that's what they like.
Maybe meals. For a meal.
Yeah, a gift card for a meal is always really appreciated. I know, like I've mentioned before, my mom had a meal delivered for us just recently. And yeah, it was like the best treat. It was really needed at that time. Some people may want help with chores. It could be a variety of things you could ask. Or if something even better, like we ask for it all the time. One of the biggest ways to support is to donate to a cause. That's important to them.
Colitis Foundation.
Yep.
The blood bank, important things like that.
Right. So find out what that cause is and make donation and let them know you did that. So these are all things that you can do to help someone going through grief, going through whatever loss they are going through.
And help them along their journey.
Yeah. And that's the important part. Support each other. Just be a good friend and be a good family member. Please reach out for help if you do feel like you're going through grief and you're not getting through it the way you should be or in a healthy way. Don't ever be afraid to ask for help. So we're all here to help.
We're here to support each other and to let each other know that they're not alone.
Yep. That's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. So with that,
we can conclude this episode.
We're done with the episode. So you guys can follow us on Instagram at Team IB Determined. And you can see all of our fun adventures, all of our hospital visits, and
things like that.
All of our pictures of the blood bank that we just took for that. That was a lot of fun.
We'll
have some upcoming fun events. And in fact, Mason's speaking at an event tomorrow morning. Yeah. He's going to be the mission speaker for the spin for Crohn's and Colitis cures. So he's going to be doing that. So we'll hopefully include that or talk about that next week.
Yep.
And you're also welcome to listen to us. If you are watching us right now, you could be also listening if you prefer that on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or Apple Podcasts. On Buzzsprout, there's also, you have the link there where you can see all the different icons and links where you can listen.
We talk on.
Yep. So you're welcome to listen to us on there. And for those of you who prefer to watch,
you can go to YouTube, IB Determined. That's where we are. And if you are watching us right now, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to be notified every time we post a video, make sure to hit that bell. And also, we don't get comments that often. We have been getting comments, so if you have been commenting, thank you so much.
I was waiting for you to say it. It's like,
here comes the guilt trip on comments.
We were just talking about this the other day. We're like, you know how Mason always says, we were talking to his dad about it, like, oh, Mason always makes everyone feel bad. Like,
no, they haven't commented. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you comment or not, but we do appreciate getting comments and we'll read them all. And a few things you could comment on if you wanted to was future episode ideas. Maybe you
Yeah.
want to say what you're on, if what you have, why you're watching, what
Yep.
brought you to this podcast, interesting things like that. If you just want to say hello, you can say hello in the comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or let us know with like on this kind of episode, let us know if you realize now that you went through grief too. Feel free to share your experience or offer any ideas that would have helped you. So that's what we're all about here. Have
a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful
day,
holiday,
week, afternoon,
Christmas.
evening. I know,
Prepare for Christmas.
Listening to us. Yeah. So you guys enjoy your time until our next episode, and we'll see you back in a week.
In a week.
All right. See you on the next
episode.
Bye.
We hope you will stick around, tune in, and reach out to us with your own journeys. We are excited to give you an inside view of what it takes to be a caregiver and what it's like to be a patient.
And most of all, we hope you'll maybe be able to play something you hear on here that might help you in your own life. Sometimes life changes, and it's all about how you handle the journey.